Good morning, nerds. It is I. Most games have a winner and a loser, maybe even multiple losers. There are some variations. In the modern day, it is somewhat demurred to have participation trophies for everyone and say, everyone's a winner, everyone's great, everyone's amazing, which some people love and some people hate. Tabletop RPGs, being that they are role-playing games, you would assume function like most games and have a winner and a loser. And that's what we'll be discussing in this week's video. Is it really true that there are no winners and no losers in tabletop RPGs? And if so, why is this? So, sit down, buckle up, and throw away your reward acceptance features. You won't be needing them. But before we go any further, please do subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications, as doing so will, in fact, make you a winner! So, I think the first place we need to start here is GM player power dynamics. Barring a handful of exceptions, such as games with no GM, or games where there is a hard rule that constrains the GM's powers, such as D&D 4th edition had certain rules to that effect, or the GM metacurrencies in games like the 2D20 games by Modiphius or Wrath and Glory, where the GM has to spend points to make the players' lives worse, rather than just doing it on a whim, GMs have absolute power. I used this example in my last video, and I'm going to use it again, because it's my favourite example, and it's nice and simple. A GM can make a whole bunch of newbie adventurers in their first session fight 1,000 dragons. They can say, 8,000 dragon shop, roll initiative. And if by some miracle there are any characters left standing at the start of round 2, they can say, hey, I control all of the rules, none of your armor or other abilities work against dragon fire. Bye-bye. They can do that. And while it's really ever this extreme at the table, the simple fact that GMs can hose their players anytime they want is why there is no competition between GMs and players. At all. Now that doesn't stop GMs from trying to get competitive with their players, and I do have a section on that in my last video, but that very simply summarizes why you can't have this competition between the two. So, in most cases, the GM has to take either one of two postures in dealing with their players. First, they either take the position of a neutral referee of the player's actions, with a simple belief that, if the players succeed, they succeed, if they fail, they fail. This is the one that I tend to lean towards, and it is also potentially the one with the most risk factors for adversarial GMing, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't take it. It just means that if you take it, you should be damned careful what you're doing. The second posture that a GM can take is that of the collaborator with the players. We're all working together, we're all friends, we're all trying to make a story, it's going to be so amazing, la-di-da-di-da, la-di-da-di-da. Again, there are advantages to this posture. For one thing, it puts adversarial GMing out of the question. It can, however, lead to GMs acting like doormats who make it a bit too easy for the players to succeed by removing the challenge and, by extension, the fun. Now, even in the neutral referee case, the GM is still never competing with the players. Not because they can't, but because it wouldn't be any fun. And this is, I think, the second point that has to be made as to why RPGs are not a competition. Winning is no fun for the GM. First off, we need to define what victory conditions would be, and then what would follow from them. The first and most obvious possible condition is a total party kill, a TPK. The NPCs did so well in the combat, all of the players hit 0, and that's it. Bye-bye. I have had in my GM career only one TPK, plus a couple of partial TPKs where every character who was in the fight died, but there were characters who either their players won at the session, or their character was variously transported 2d10 minutes into the future, or thrown through a window into the nearest body of water, in both cases by a d10,000 wild magic table that we were using. So he got away scot-free from 2 near TPKs. Now, what happens in this case? The first thing that happens is the player has to grind to a halt while everybody makes new characters. This generally coincides with a sudden, albeit rather expected, dip in the mood, which, unless they're a sociopath or a narcissist, the GM will be sensitive to and will probably experience for themselves as well. Now, once the new characters are made, the GM has to figure out what the hell they're doing now. They can either try and slot the new party into the existing campaign, or they can just start a new campaign altogether. The first of these options is easier than the second, but neither one is easy. I would know. My last campaign began with a Session 1 TPK. Now, I did a hybrid of both. I kept the same campaign world, but I did not have the players pick up where the previous adventurers left off. Instead, I jumped forward a couple of days to, okay, what happens if the PCs lost that adventure? And the answer that I came up with is that a bunch of undead who were in the mines they were exploring were released into the world at large and began their attempted conquest. That's simple. Now, I wouldn't say as a GM this is an especially fun situation to be in. Again, barring some deficit of empathy, you will feel the negative emotions from your players. Now, sometimes it is worth it to put up with your players being a bit miserable. I do this all the time. It's not recommended, it's not proper GM ethics, but I do it, and the reason I do it comes down to campaign integrity. Some players, especially my ones, will come up with rather ridiculous ideas that would either push the kind of moral and comfort boundaries of the game, or would completely derail the current adventure. As a general rule, I try not to crimp my players as much as I can, but I will try and keep them within the existing framework. What they do in that framework is up to them, but I am not too kind about them going beyond it. That is how I've done things, and that does lead to the occasional argument at the table. However, at least my group tends to get over things quickly, so I am not too worried. That being said, pissing your players off is not a good habit to be making. And while you can probably get away with 1 TPK in a campaign, maybe 2, and again, if they're partial TPKs, then there's more flexibility there as well. You don't want to make a habit of it. You won't be having fun, and your players won't be having fun. Beyond the flooding of negative emotion, you will now have to deal with a whole bunch more prep as you try to get the campaign back on track. Remember, the whole reason I am such an orderly rules nut of a GM is to stop things derailing. If things derail because I ran the NPCs too successfully, I have just put myself in a hell of my own making. That being said, not every disaster in a campaign is a TPK. Sometimes, the players just fail at their objectives. They try to persuade a bunch of NPCs to progress their goals, and end up pissing them off and getting run out of town. This has happened to my players before in previous campaigns. Likewise, sometimes a combat goes so badly that the players either surrender or more likely just run away. Now, what happens in this situation? Well, the characters are still alive, so there's not that headache to deal with. But again, the mood has deflated, and again, you are now off the rails. And not in a fun way. Admittedly, the ball ache here is lesser, but by no means non-existent. If your players failed to progress a goal, they now need to find a new way around to complete their current adventure. In that example from before, this was a Cyberpunk Red campaign, where the players are trying to locate a bunch of hostages, and more specifically to find out what was going on with them. Now, they tracked down a nomad doctor who had been treating the hostages to her nomad camp, and so they went by to pay her a visit. However, they didn't get to speak to her immediately, they had to deal with one of the other nomads first. And in this process, they proceeded to repeatedly insinuate that the nomads were responsible for a whole bunch of hostages being taken, and B, those hostages catching typhoid. Needless to say, the nomads were a bit insulted, to which the players responded, "No, we're not insulting you, we're just saying that we've heard that you might have been involved in a bunch of hostages being taken, and those hostages then getting typhoid." To which both the NPC and I said, "That is basically the same thing, you are on your last warning." And they then got angry at me and doubled down. Combat ensued, and yeah, it did not go well for them. They only brought 2 of the party with them. Never split the party, but split the party they did. And so very quickly they were surrounded, outnumbered, and bleeding out. One of them got a broken leg, and the other was still pretty roughed up. Now, in the spirit of generosity, I let them live. However, I took away their guns and any other expensive items on their person, before sending them on their way the next morning with their bike left with only 1 structural damage point. Structural damage points, or SDPs, being HP for vehicles in Cyberpunk Red. I kind of stand by my decision in this scenario, but I also see how much of a headache this caused. Suddenly, the lead the PCs wanted to use was now no longer available to them. The solution that I found for this quandary was for the campaign to fall apart for unrelated reasons. So, what can we learn from this? Generally, RPGs run most smoothly when the player characters are alive and succeeding at their goals. While succeeding at individual roles isn't always important, sometimes failing a role can lead to the game stalling. This does happen, and this is generally why fail-forward mechanics are becoming more and more popular in tabletop RPGs. However, when it comes to the session or the adventure or the campaign as a whole, If you want to maintain momentum, it is usually easier to build on success than failure. This does, however, lead us to a problem. We can make things nice and easy. We can make sure the players are never in over their depth, make sure that no single roll can ever completely stymie them, and even on a game design level, weight combats in favor of the PCs by editing NPC stats, encounter balance, and even changing the mechanics themselves to give the players every advantage. Some RPGs do this, but this creates a counter problem. I briefly touched on it earlier when I talked about the two kind of non-adversarial GM postures. And there is a problem with the second way, which is if you remove the potential for session or campaign stalling setbacks, you also remove a lot of the threat that the players face, and by extension, you kill the tension in the game. And so we come to the point where this is kind of an overcorrection. If success is all but guaranteed, then your players can actually get a bit reckless, a bit uppity, and start doing stupid things that, again, derail the campaign. Now, to be clear, a little bit of derailment here and there isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can lead to, surprising and spontaneous events that no one could have foreseen that ended up being really fun. But it can also lead to GM headaches and extra prep time, or indeed having to pause the session to figure out what the fuck you're supposed to do now. So, in practice, derailing is a bit of a coin flip. There is good derailing, there is bad derailing. And when I talk about preventing derailing, I am specifically talking about the bad kind. If you think, as a GM, that the derailment that is about to happen at your table will be fun, keep going. If you don't, then it's time to start taking actions to prevent it. This is also not to say that you should railroad your players. You shouldn't. I do not believe in railroading. Ultimately, part of the fun of RPGs is the freedom and the choice of it, and you need to make sure that your players have a decent helping of that. But that shouldn't come at the expense of the integrity of the campaign as a whole. And with this caveat cleared, I'd like to come to the final conclusion, which is that in tabletop RPGs, either everybody wins or nobody wins. If the GM wins at the expense of the players, then everything goes to hell. If the players win at the expense of the GM in some way, by derailing their plans in an unfun way, or some other trickery, then again, things aren't going to be fun. Both the players and the GM need to win simultaneously, or the loser will drag the other one down. It's that simple. However, in order for success to be enjoyable and meaningful, there has to be the possibility of failure. As the GM, you have to ride the line as closely as you can, bringing your players as close to the point of failure as you can without tipping them over the edge. Because that is where tension comes from, that is where excitement comes from, that is where drama comes from. And if you want any of those things, you have to be willing to take the risks, to play dangerously with the integrity of the campaign and the aliveness of the player characters. You also have to accept at some points that there'll be rough patches, there'll be moments that just aren't very fun, for you or for the players. And what you need to do is kind of learn to face the pain, as it were. You need to learn how to rebuild after a setback. Again, I have had a lot of rough sessions in my GM career. I've had a lot of arguments with players in my GM career. And in almost all cases, I've been able to rebuild from them, either by rebuilding within the campaign or just starting a new campaign altogether. There are two kind of main fears that GMs can kind of come into. Sometimes they fear being too kind and taking the stakes away, and other times they fear being too rough and making it unfun for the players. At various points in your GM career, you will need to risk both, and you will experience both. And you'll need to figure out how to pick up the pieces and carry on forwards. That's just how it is. So, go forth, take risks, live dangerously, but at the end of the day, always make sure that the table as a whole is having fun. And it's a wrap. Thank you all so much for watching. I realise that I've been making a lot of unscripted videos lately. Part of that is me trying to stabilise my work-life balance, as it were, and part of that is I have another big video coming down the pipe and I need extra time to work on it. So do stay tuned for that. If you enjoyed this video though, then please give it a like, share it with your friends, and leave a comment down below. What's been the biggest hurdle that you've come across as a GM or a player at the table, and how did you guys get past it? If you'd like to see more videos like this one, then please subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. It really does help. Anyway, I have a very long, very painful video to make, so I'd better get back to that. Once more though, thank you all so much for watching, and until I see you next, farewell.